Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. Thanks for joining us today for the 2021 Build to Scale Kickoff webinar. And before we jump in, let me just reiterate congratulations to you all. Very excited to have you as partners with us in this program. We are going to have 5 presenters together today. Misha, if you could jump to the next slide. Myself, I will try to keep out of the way as much as possible so you can get some good information from the rest of the folks on the call. We've got Shevis, our deputy, Misha, an economic development specialist here, along with Michelle and Renee, who are also economic development specialists in a couple of our regional offices. We could jump to the next slide. I imagine you all are familiar at this point with the respective EDA regional offices, but just as a refresher, we have 6, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Denver, Austin, and Seattle. You'll be working with folks directly from your respective regional offices, wherever your project happens to lie. And you'll also be working with us, Travis, Misha, myself, a couple other folks in the headquarters offices here in DC. All right, we'll jump to the next slide and talk a little bit about the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the cohort, celebrate a little bit with your fellow awardees, and then we'll dive into the meat of this. Award terms, grants online, the system that we use to manage the grants and the files. We'll talk about scope of work, amendments, budget changes, some expenses and disbursements, always exciting, how you actually get the check. Reporting and metrics, that's the stuff that makes us excited, seeing the impacts that you all have, and then the next steps from here. So if we could jump, I think we could probably just jump 2 slides ahead and talk about this cohort. So 50 organizations, again, congratulations to you all. 30 of those on the Venture Challenge side, 17 on the Capital Challenge side. If we jump to the next slide, we can see a little bit more about where you all are dialing in today. We hit a number of different states, and also a number of different states have multiple awards. So it'll be interesting to see how you all fare over the course of the coming years and how you all work together and learn together as well. If we could jump to the next slide, welcome to this much larger family. The Build to Scale, formerly the Regional Innovation Strategies Program, now has coverage in all 50 states plus 2 territories. It's 327 grants, over $170 million in federal funding. So it's a big family of folks, a big family of grants and awards that you're joining. And to that point in particular, I'd like to jump to the next slide and just encourage you all to really make this a community. We can all learn from each other. We learn from you all. You all can learn from each other. We hope that there are opportunities for you all to exchange what you learn and what you experience, and really just build upon this work. I think it's really exciting that we've got such a cohort now, that we've grown this program over a number of years, and it's really exciting to add you all to it as well. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to talk about some of the meat and potatoes of grants and talk about award terms. Jess?
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Shevis Granum, and we're going to talk about the award package and required documents. Next slide, please. So here is a list of the required documents for your grant agreement, and they are located in your Grants Online grants file under award package. All of the links to each one of these documents will be a blue hyperlink. So I would advise you to please review the terms and conditions, each one of these documents, before accepting your EDA award. And please reach out to your project officer, your EDA point of contact, if you have any questions about any of these documents before signing the award terms and conditions, because these will guide how we will manage the award moving forward. Next slide. Great. And then in terms of managing the grant, who's responsible? So For most awards, there's just going to be one applicant, the lead applicant, the lead recipient for the award, and they are responsible for communicating with EDA and providing the necessary documentation in order to meet the requirements of your award agreement. If in the case there is a co-recipient along with the lead recipient for the award, the co-recipient is also required to meet the terms and conditions of the award. However, just the lead recipient will communicate primarily through Grants Online to EDA. So any documentation that you might need for reporting or post-approval, the co-recipient will submit that documentation to the lead recipient, who will then communicate it with EDA. So just some basics on who's responsible for the award. Next slide. I think we're passing it over next to Grants Online.
Hi again, my name is Misha McDaniel, and I'm joining on behalf of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship to provide an introduction to Grants Online, the grant management system that will be used for the purpose of administering this Build to Scale award. For those of you who are new to Build to Scale, I'd like to note that this grant management system is overseen by NOAA, another agency within the Department of Commerce. I wanted to mention that up the front so you'll understand why they're the point of contact for additional assistance in navigating the system. So, what do you use GOL for? First and foremost, GOL is the place where you can find the award package, formerly referred to as the CD450 that Shivish just described. As with grants.gov, GOL is a system that delivers automated notifications and allows access based on user roles. Two roles that we want to highlight today are the authorized representatives and the recipient administrators. The authorized representative at your organization is the person who received the Grants Online award notification. This person has the authority to accept or decline the award on your behalf and has the ability to designate GOL roles to other team members. Another key role within Grants Online is the recipient administrator, which can manage user access, including adding or changing user roles and permissions in the system. If this is your organization's first award, the system will default to making the authorized representative a recipient administrator. There are other roles in GOL that allow for members of your organization to initiate award action requests, prepare and submit reports, etc. So please take the time to familiarize yourself with the various roles and responsibilities within GOL so that you can assign the right folks and backups to fulfill administrative responsibilities during the 3-year performance period. As you can see, Grants Online is and will be the primary hub for initiating award actions, requesting funds, and submitting most of the administrative requirements for this Build to Scale award. In addition to the slides in this presentation, you will also receive a Build to Scale grantee toolkit with resources for supporting grant administration, and I highly recommend that new grantees and those less familiar with GOL review the PowerPoint entitled Grants Online Training for EDA Grantees, which includes step-by-step directions for navigating key actions in this system. I would also recommend reviewing the grant recipient resources on NOAA's website, which are linked here. And if you need help within GOL, such as updating passwords, managing user roles, etc., the GOL Help Desk at NOAA is the appropriate place to go, and their contact information is listed here. Now let me turn it over to my colleague, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Rogers, and I'll go over the grant information briefly: scope of work, amendments, and budget. Each of these items plays an integral part in proactively aligning and managing your resources. Scope of work defines the activities, milestones, and metrics. It identifies the goals and outcomes of the project. The scope of work should explain how the proposed activities will address the specific economic gaps identified in the project narrative document. Activities will generally fall into one of the following 3 categories: technical assistance, applied research, and disseminating information. The scope of work should be no longer than 1 page. It should describe the activities, identify the anticipated economic impacts, and the benefits of the region. Anticipated benefits may include traditional metrics like job growth and income, but the measurable outcomes of any activities should be included. More details are in the notice of funding opportunity, so it's important that you read through the document in its entirety. The preferred format for submitting files is Adobe PDF and, when appropriate, Microsoft Excel. Changes require prior EDA approval, and changes result in an amendment to the award. Next slide, please. Award amendments are required when substantial changes to the award are necessary to resolve unforeseen problems, allow additional time to complete the project, or adjust the authorized budget. Some common award amendments are no-cost extensions, budget revisions, changes to the authorized or key project personnel. All require prior approval and submission of an award action request, or AAR, in Grants Online. Submit your request for approval with justification as an attachment in PDF or Excel format. Please reach out to your program officer for any questions prior to submitting your request. Next slide, please. Authorized budget. The budget will be used and it's tied to your activities. It's used to monitor your project expenses, including matching funds incurred. The changes to any budget line item requires prior approval from EDA and must be documented in Grants Online. If the change is less than 10%, it does not require an amendment. A change of 10% or more requires an amendment and approval by the grants officer. Next slide, please. Authorized budget, federal versus matching. Recipients are responsible for tracking matching funds in the same manner as federal share. Non-federal matching funds are governed by the same principles and requirements as the federal EDA funds. Federal share and matching share are governed under 2 CFR 200 and uniform guidance principles. Salaries are considered cash, so please keep that in mind when you're mapping out your budget. In-kind contributions are allowed. Examples of in-kind sources are third-party volunteer, staff time, equipment, office space and utilities, and technical assistance. Other federal funding sources are usually not allowed as match for EDA. One exception for this would be Community Development Block Grant funding. Matching share commitment letters are required for each source of your matching share. The match letters must state that the funds are committed to the project for the duration of the project period, are available as needed, and are not restricted or encumbered in any way. Cash match letters must state the cash amount and the source of the funds. In-kind match letters should state the funding amounts and provide evaluation of the in-kind services. Please reach out to your regional EDA listed in the notice of funding opportunity for further guidance if you have questions on in-kind services. Next slide, please. Authorized budget cost principles. The reference is to CFR 200, subpart E, cost principles. The documented project costs must be consistent with the scope of work and the budget. Unallowed costs include promotional items and alcohol. Project costs should be reasonable, allowable, allocable, and per the uniform administrative requirements related to cost principles and audit requirements for federal awards located at 2 CFR Part 300. Composition of the federal award costs is the sum of the allowable direct and indirect costs less any applicable credits. In addition to being necessary and reasonable for the performance of the award, the cost must be consistent with policies and procedures, be accorded consistent with generally accepted accounting principles, be adequately documented, and incurred during the approved budget period. If you are unsure or have questions about project costs, please consider. Next slide, please. Authorized budget, contracts and procurement. If portions of the project scope of work includes contractors or subcontractors, The goods or services must be procured in a competitive manner following federal procurement regulations, consistent with 2 CFR 200.319 competition, using full and open competition to eliminate any unfair competitive advantage. All contracts must be put to bid and evaluated using grantees' procurement standards and in accordance with federal procurement regulations. Grantees may not use sole source procurement without prior EDA approval. Grantees should keep all decision-making documentation. EDA reserves the right to ask for proof of compliance to the competitive bidding process. For additional information, see the Uniform Guidance 2 CFR Section 200.317, Procurements by State, through Sections 200.326, Bonding Requirements. Next slide, please. Scope, amendments, and budget. In summary, adjustments are okay with transparency and accountability. We understand that things may change. The goal is to be proactive and timely in advising your program officer of anticipated changes. Collaboration is the key to success, and we welcome your questions if you are unsure. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Michelle, can you tell me which side we're on?
Expenses. That's okay. It should be expenses, disbursements, how to get paid.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Disbursements. EDA uses ASAP, an electronic payment system, to allow grantees to request and draw from pre-authorized accounts. New to ASAP or already have an account with another agency, submit your ASAP enrollment form and ACH standard form SF3881 via email to edagrants@noaa.gov. If you have questions about the forms or enrollment, contact your program officer prior to submitting the forms. You can also contact the ASAP Help Desk at 855-868-0151. Choose option 2, then choose option 3 as your prompt. Standard Help Desk operating hours are Monday through Friday, except federal holidays, 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, or by email at asaphelpdesk@fiscaltreasury.gov. Next slide, please. Disbursements. Unsure if you're enrolled in ASAP? Check in Grants Online. ASAP recipient information is listed under the grant information within Grants Online and should say yes if you are currently enrolled. Next slide, please. Disbursements. Grantees are encouraged to request funds on a quarterly basis. The request may be for a reimbursement or advance. All requests should include the standard form SF270 that has a digital or wet signature affixed by the authorized representative, a non-construction disbursement tracker, and invoices. Your program officer may request additional documentation. Confirm with EDA program officer that your ASAP award association is complete before requesting disbursements. Next slide, please. Disbursements workflow. In Grants Online, the grantee initiates an award action request in the form of an ASAP drawdown request. You'll want to save the AAR, attach your supporting documentation, save the AAR again, and then forward it to EDA. EDA will review the request, and if it's free of discrepancies, accept it. If there are discrepancies, the request will be returned to the grantee for revisions with an explanation. Once approved, Grants Online will notify the grantee via email. The grantee will log on to ASAP to request the drawdown of funds. For additional information, see slides 25 through 29 in the Grants Online training for EDA grantees. Please note this is a two-step process and should be completed in Grants Online first, and the asap.gov transaction should follow the Grants Online notification of approval. The ASAP authorizer may reject requests that are submitted to them prior to receiving your Grants Online approval. Next slide, please. Did I lose you, Nisha?
Let's see, is it showing disbursements at the top?
Disbursement summary. Prompt: ASAP enrollment is critical to financial success. Enroll in ASAP immediately following acceptance of the award if you are not already enrolled. If you are enrolled, log on to asap.gov and confirm the information listed is accurate, including legal name, bank information, contact number, etc., and update any fields as necessary. Ensure you have a backup financial point of contact, have a backup person listed to receive the information related to your financial concerns in your absence. Officer, when questions arise, if you have questions about submitting award action requests, we can't say this enough, please reach out to your program officer related to ASAP disbursements prior to. Next slide, please, and I will hand it off to Renee.
Hello, everyone. We are going to talk about reporting and metrics collection. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about the different reporting and metric collections that happen during the grant period. This is a graph here that gives a good summary of what each report entails. We have a progress reports, which are narrative reports that are submitted through Grants Online, the web-based monitoring system that we've talked about in previous presenters. Those are submitted semi-annually. And we have our financial reports, which are also known as SF425s. And those are also submitted semi-annually to Grants Online. So those two reports will have the same deadline each reporting period. So you'll be doing those at the same time, which is pretty easy to remember. And then we also have the ED 916 and ED 917, which are metrics that are collected through our new web-based format called Qualtrics. And those will be submitted semi-annually as well for the ED 916, and then annually for the ED 916 or 917 is 5 years. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk about the financial and progress reports for this slide that are through Grants Online. So that's what we're going to focus on here. The semi-annual reports cover period October 1 through March 31st and April 1st through September 30th. Those are the two reporting periods that we have each year. Each report is due 30 days after the reporting end date. So for the October reporting periods, it'll be due 30 days after it ends on April 30th, and the same for the following reporting period. So a lot of our grantees have some reports coming up, so that's exciting. Final reports are due no later than 120 days after the project end date, and you'll have a final progress report and a final financial report due both at those 120 days. Grants Online will send you a few email reminders to the PI, so be sure to be checking your emails and possibly your spam folders to ensure that those don't get lost in the mix. Next slide, please. This slide is showing the template for the progress reports. Please be sure to include a brief paragraph that outlines what your project is and a high-level overview. So if someone other than your project officer is reading these reports, they're really understanding what the project is and what those outcomes are for the project reporting period. And then for the activity summary, please be sure to explain in detail what happened during the reporting period, including any relevant dates and activities. Please remember to complete the form in entirety and upload it to Grants Online. As a helpful tip, if you're not really familiar with Grants Online, before you submit the report, please be sure to click save, and then you can start the workflow. My favorite tip is just click save as many times as possible so you can ensure that all of your attachments are saved. Next slide, please. So here's a quick snapshot of the federal financial report, or often referred to SF 425. We'll go into further detail of each box in the next slide, but just to note that this is what you'll see when you complete the report in Grants Online. And another important note is these financial reports are cumulative over time, over a project period, so they should report financials from day one of the project to the end of the project period of performance, which would be 9/30 and 3/31 of each year. Next slide, please. This is a pretty hefty slide, so hang in there with me, but I wanted to make sure to outline exactly what the federal financial reporting explains and how to report accurately. So we'll go through what each box means, and for the federal expenditures and unobligated balances, which is block 10. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's pretty small, but you'll be able to see it when you do your reporting. So we'll have the cash receipts, and that refers to the actual amount that you have received from EDA and disbursement. Cash disbursements is the federal share of expenditures charged to the grant to date. So for accrual-based accounting, this amount is likely greater than the cash receipts, and for cash-based accounting, box 10A and box 10B usually are the same. Cash on hand is cash receipts minus cash. For accrual-based accounting, this may result in a negative number, and if the amount is plus or minus 5,000, you'll be prompted to write in an explanation. So just an important note. For the federal expenditures and unobligated funds, box 10D is the total federal funds authorized, which is the federal share of the award amount. Box 10E is the federal share of expenditures. This number should be the same as the cash receipts in box 10A. Since they both refer to the amount that has been paid out by EDA. Box 10F is the federal share of unliquidated funds, is the expenses incurred that have not been paid out by EDA yet. Box 10G is the total federal share, which would be the federal dollars spent, either paid out or outstanding, which you can just add the two lines above. It does give a great tip within this report of, take box 10 whatever minus box 10 whatever, and it really does help out. So it might sound like a lot right now, but the form does really great job. Box 10H is the total federal amount authorized minus the total federal share. So that would be box 10D minus box 10G. Please note that all these boxes are labeled on the form, so no need to memorize it. Moving on to the recipient share. The total recipient share required is the total match committed to the project. The recipient share of expenditures are the match dollars spent. The remaining recipient share provided is the remaining match dollars. Please ensure you are not charging any amount over the federal share than the grant rate. So if your grant rate is 50% of the project is federal share, then you may not charge any amount over 50% to the federal share. Please complete the form in entirety. It needs to be signed digitally or ink by the AOR or the accountant. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk a bit about the reporting and metrics. As I noted before, these reports are not going to be completed in Grants Online. These are through a web-based platform called Qualtrics. You would receive a link to complete your report via email. The report will be sent to the award point of contact. The point of contact will come from the SACs. If you want to change the person who receives the email to do the ED 916 and ED 917, please contact your project officer and we can get that email changed. And then for some additional information, please visit eda.gov/performance/GPRA. That's a link at the bottom here. There's a host of resources on this site, including a copy of the report that you can look through ahead of time to get prepared, webinars on how to complete the report, and a list of FAQs. It's a really great resource. Next slide, please. This is the new ED 916 semi-annual questionnaire on outputs, sponsored under EDA grant. So on this slide, we have listed all the metrics that you can report on semi-annual basis. Remember that these metrics are the same across all EDA programs, so they might not be applicable to your program. A great thing about this new system is that you're able to skip whatever questions that are not applicable to your project, only reporting on those that are, even if this means that you're only answering some questions within a given category and not others. Please note that this slide does serve as a great resource to use when you're completing your report. And a lot of grantees do come back to this slide and really reference it. So it's great to keep on hand. Next slide, please. This is the new ED 917, the annual outcomes questionnaire for the grantee serving. These are metrics that you'll be reporting on an annual basis for 5 years after your project has started. As with the semi-annual metrics on the ED 916, you will only report on those that are applicable to your program. Anything that is not, you will skip. Next slide, please. So in summary, we've talked about the 3 different types of reports, the progress and financial reports that are completed through Grants Online, and then the metrics, the ED 916 and ED 917 that are reported through Qualtrics, which you'll receive that link through the email. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk about what's next, and I'll turn it over to Shivas to go over the follow-up steps. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Hello again, and we're just going to go over our next steps. Next slide, please. So the first thing we would like you to do, and this is probably the most important, is to schedule a one-on-one call with your program officer at EDA. This person will be your day-to-day point of contact for this award, so it's important to get to know your program officer as soon as possible. Hopefully you've already reached out to them, but nevertheless, hopefully you get a chance to meet them soon. Enroll in ASAP. ASAP is extremely important since the process takes about a month to complete. And it's out of EDA's hands. It actually goes to the Department of Treasury. So please follow the directions in your OIE toolkit to start the ASAP enrollment process as soon as possible. You will not be able to make your first reimbursement or disbursement request without having been enrolled in ASAP. So as soon as possible is great. Review all the documentation. We're going to send you additional documentation after this webinar, the OIE toolkit. Please review the toolkit. Please review all the documentation in this webinar just to familiarize yourself with all of the requirements of this award. Also, Grants Online, that's going to be our best friend in communicating with this project and this process. So Grants Online has a lot of user resources, so please make sure to familiarize yourself with the Grants Online process. Your project officer will also, program officer will also be able to help you with navigating in Grants Online. So if you have any questions, please reach out to them. And then also just start your work. It's time to start working on this project. We're excited to see the great results and metrics that we'll be able to pull from these projects and the success stories. So please, by all means, begin working on your projects. And stay in touch. Next slide, please. And here are the regional points of contact. So in Grants Online, in your grants file, it will list who your program officer is, along with their contact information. So please reach out to your program officer. We will also send a copy of these slides when we send out information later today. So you'll be able to have their contact information if you don't already have it, and all the regional offices are represented here. Next slide, please. Okay, so now it's time for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll be sure to respond to you now if we definitely have an answer, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible in case we don't have an answer immediately. So we'll open up to Q&A via the chat.
Thanks, Shivas. We already have a few questions in the chat. Do you want to take the time and read some of the answers that have already been responded to?
Sure, let's go over it really quickly. Okay, so the first question I see here, Mary Beth Jarvis, you're asking whether just the lead applicant, primary grantee, or co-recipients, co-applicants, do they also need to enroll in the ASAP system? So again, it's where that lead recipient plays the major part in communicating with EDA. That will also be applied to the ASAP system and the Grants Online system. So the lead recipient will be the lead in communicating with all of the systems related to this project. So it will be the lead that should apply to the ASAP system to enroll this award. And if you already have an ASAP account, you'll essentially be enrolling to link this award to your current ASAP account. The official start date for this award, I believe it's October 1. I might be corrected. It could also be November 1. So it'll be on your, it will be in Grants Online on the first page of your grants file, whether it's an October 1 start date or a November 1 start date. So please check the grants file once you go in to approve the award to see the start date for this award. Okay, questions on GOL portal. When we go to the portal to accept the award, we don't see the accept award option in the drop down. Do we need to do anything before? So in this presentation that we just provided, there is a link to Grants Online to all of the grant recipient user resources. One of the first ones listed is going to be how to accept your award. So I would say use the link that we provided, and Grants Online provides screenshots, step-by-step screenshots on how to complete any action in Grants Online as a grant recipient. And the first one is going to, well, one of the first few should say accept award. So please use that feature as a guide to accepting your award in Grants Online. If you have any questions outside of that document, then call the Grants Online help desk for assistance. Yes, the slides will be made available.
Hey, Chevy, could you go up to Gretchen Knapp's question? That sounds like it would be better answered via voice than via chat.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, no. 1 second, going back to the chat. Okay, now I see it. Okay. So if we have services under contracting, can we change that to personnel role that we hire as long as we adjust under a cost match? Okay, so if you have technically a line item for contractual services and you decide that that activity will no longer be performed by a contract and you're going to move it to in-house staff to complete, then that will be considered a rebudget, but it depends on the percentage. So if it's greater than 10% of the total project cost, then you might have to submit a rebudget request in Grants Online. If it's less than 10%, then prior approval isn't required. So I would say in this case, if this happens, call your program officer as soon as possible so they can guide you in the right direction to go. So there are a few other details that go along with that, but when we get to that point, I would say talk to your program officer for guidance. Any other questions, Misha, I should address? I think I've addressed many, but any other ones that you see?
Yeah, let's go with Becky's at the top. I feel like that would apply to a lot of different people.
Great. Okay. How should we document pass-through funds? How do we report funds that support salary positions? How do we report funds that support 1099 contract employees? So when you report, not necessarily report, but when you submit payment requests, disbursement requests, we're going to ask for kind of like a summary of each of your budget line items. So whether it's personnel, whether it's fringe, we're going to ask for a summary. So we expect you to keep documentation for the salary time to date that is technically part of the staffing plan for this project that's been expended. We expect you to also keep track of contract employees and their time. So you don't usually have to report that level of detail to us, but in our disbursement tracker, we'll send this in our toolkit. We would like you to track the total figure in terms of personnel that have been expended to date. So that's normally how we would like it to be communicated, but we like you to also keep accurate records for audit purposes. In terms of pass-through funds, I mean, that one we probably can have a conversation offline because I probably would need to know a little bit additional detail in terms of what you mean by pass-through funds. So maybe that's a question you could ask to us or even to your project officer or program officer for specific guidance. Any other questions?
Yeah, do you want me to read it to you?
Sure.
What do we need to do? This is another one from Becky. Oh, getting third like. What do we
Okay.
need to do if one of the people named in the personnel list, what we call the staffing plan, leaves or needs to be replaced?
Yes. But as I believe Michelle mentioned earlier in the presentation, if any if there are any changes to your staffing, like the identified persons in your staffing plan, or any positions in your staffing plan that might change, that requires prior approval of EDA. So the next step will be to talk to your program officer for additional guidance, and then you'll submit a request in Grants Online. All prior approval requests have to be submitted through Grants Online officially. So you submit a request in Grants Online, your program officer will provide the details of what's necessary in order to submit, salaries, some justification, some additional documentation, and you'll submit it to EDA for review and approval. Jordan Fuller has a question. So given that this is a 3-year timeline, if things are progressing faster than expected, what is the requirement to adjust the project timeline budget? We would hope that this project is completed in the 3-year time frame. And if you come to that point where the project period, like you're completed the scope of work before the project period, we could work with the program officer to determine what the next best step is. So let's say if it's a few months before the end of the award, I mean, there's no harm in just allowing the time to run out, even though you finish the scope of work, and then you'll just have to report out. But if it's, let's say, 6 months or a year before and you've already completed your scope of work, then that will require a discussion with the program officer to determine like what's the next best step in terms of reporting and the award being open in Grants Online. So if you come to that, we'll talk to the program officer for the next best steps there. In terms of documenting personnel costs, are awardee organizations required to use timesheets? We normally defer to the recipients on how they normally document time, and of course, timesheets are one of the ways that most organizations use. So it depends on what your normal process is for documenting personnel costs. Just always think in terms of any dollars spent on this award, making sure they apply to the uniform requirements and to the cost principles, and that anything could be, this file could be audited. So make sure that you keep great records, and I would assume that you would go with whatever record keeping method that you normally have, but EDA doesn't require a specific type of recording mechanism. Are there any other questions that we might have missed, Misha?
No, but we have a few more minutes in case anyone can think of some. Feel free to send them over.
Perfect. Okay. Oh, I see one from Debbie Irwin about Grants Online. So you reached out to the Grants Online help desk. You haven't received additional instructions. If you've emailed Grants Online for a question, I guess it just depends on timing, but usually they're fairly responsive. You can also give Grants Online a call and reference the ticket number that might have been emailed to you, that should have been emailed to you. But after this presentation, again, you'll receive a toolkit with all the requirements and additional documents, this presentation, and all the forms that we mentioned on this presentation as well. So Grants Online should have sent you a ticket. And if you did not get a ticket email, just acknowledging the receipt, then you can always email in, or you can give Grants Online a call directly. Melissa asked the question, is the 10% budget threshold applicable to the entire award amount? Yeah, it is. So if there is a change on the award, and let's say, the award is $1 million, like the total EDA project, $1 million, federal, non-federal, total is $1 million. Then any changes to that budget up until you get to $100,000 don't require a prior approval. But once you meet that $100,000 change, and it's cumulative, so once you get up to at least $100,000 of changes, everything after that what require prior approval from EDA. So whether it's a one-time change or multiple changes, when you hit that 10% threshold of the total project budget, EDA, and non-federal included, it requires prior approval. But again, talk to your program officer if you need to make any changes to your project, because they might ask, hey, can you at least update your budget and put it in Grants Online just so we can have a running track of any budget changes, just so that we know if we're meeting that 10% threshold. Another question. So the progress report and financial reports and how they're submitted in Grants Online. So the financial report is completed in Grants Online. It's already populated. You just put in your information inside of Grants Online. So that's the financial report, the SF425. The progress report, we're going to email you in the toolkit, the progress report template, and also the disbursement report as well. So the progress report will be a form that you upload to Grant. You'll complete it, you upload it to Grants Online, and you'll submit it with the progress report task. And just to add, when you also submit for reimbursement, there are two forms that have to be attached, the SF270 and the disbursement tracker. They're both completed and then uploaded into Grants Online. So the only form that's already populated in Grants Online is the SF425.
Do you want to take this question from Brian
Yeah.
Cole?
Yeah, sure. So essentially advance payments. If you're requesting an advance payment, then I would definitely say reach out to your program officer, because we're going to need some level of explanation as to why you're requesting an advance payment, and also some documentation. So advance payments are technically allowed, but this is a reimbursement process usually. But if you need to request an advance payment, just talk to your grants officer, because additional documentation is required. You'll still submit an SF270. You'll still submit the disbursement tracker, and in the SF270, it has a section for reimbursement or advance payment. You would select advance, but you would also have to provide additional documentation. Let's see if I missed anything else. I think I might have answered all of the questions. Oh, here's one. Do the unused funds in the first year carry over to the next year? So yes, EDA doesn't look at this project on an annual basis, even though we might have asked for that level of detail in the application process. We see it as a 3-year award, right? So the costs remain in, like the funds remain in the award until the end of the award. So we don't see it on the annual basis. We just see it as a complete project, as a 3-year project period. So yes, the funds are available throughout the entire period, but of course we would like you to request reimbursement on a quarterly basis. There's another question about semi-annual calendar year on the grant fiscal year. Well, when we say semi-annual reporting, it's in the EDA specific award conditions, which is in your CD450 document that's in Grants Online in your grants file. But semi-annually, you're reporting as of September 30 and March 30 of each year. So that's our semi-annual period, and reports are due 30 days after the end of September 30 and March 30. We'll send information on the ASAP process after this call. And in terms of this, there's another question from Bobby Kilburn. So who should the information go to? The program officer and the grants specialist. So the program officer and grant specialist should be the same person. So hopefully in your grants file, it shows up at the same person. So most likely it is, but your regional points of contact, which are listed here, that is the point of contact moving forward, and most likely they'll be represented as both the grant specialist and the project or program officer. So is it correct to say that our matching funds have to be dispersed at the same rate as our quarterly request for reimbursement? That's ideal. So ideally, it would be great if the federal and non-federal funds are spent at the same rate. Your grant rate is dependent on your non-federal commitment. So some of your awards you might be slightly oversubscribed in terms of your non-federal match, which will affect your grant reimbursement rate. So that's something that we'll talk about. You'll talk about with your project officer, but your grant reimbursement rate will be affected by how much non-federal share you have in your award, and that will correctly determine how much for each request for reimbursement you receive for federal dollars and non-federal dollars as a result of that percentage. Let's see, I'm just
It
checking.
looks like we're reaching the end of the
Okay.
presentation.
Perfect. I think we've answered everything, hopefully. If you have any other questions, reach out to your program officer. Great, and we're at the end. So thank you for joining today. Hopefully we've given out all the information that you need to at least start your award, but please reach out to your program officer for all your next steps.